Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening for Artforum Atelier. Thank you so much to Eric and the rest of the Powerhouse community for bringing us into this fantastic space tonight. And thank you so much to an artist who needs no introduction, to Robert, for being with us this evening. So thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Yep. So before we get started, just really briefly, Artforum Atelier is a new series. Well, I say new, but has anybody here attended one of our Atelier panels already? Hopefully, yes, I think some familiar faces in the crowd. Yeah, so Atelier was an initiative of live panel conversations that we inaugurated last December with an event at the Morgan Library. And now it's become a sort of regular series, and also we've taken it out on the road. So the last one we did was in Los Angeles at the Museum of Contemporary Art. We're really happy to be back here in New York this fall. Previous conversations have featured some of the just most interesting voices in contemporary art, addressing various different topics. And this is the first time that we're actually having a conversation one-on-one with an artist. And so this is modeled after our also relatively new video series called Under the Influence. So if anybody, I'm gonna just get a show of hands, a round of applause. Anyone seen Under the Influence, these new videos? Many thanks to our video producer, Brian Green, and the rest of the Artforum team for helping us kick off this video series. So this is something that we started doing last year as a way of centering artists and the work that they do, and really doing it in a way that feels reflective of Artforum's own commitment, which is to this larger constellation of ideas that are shaping how artists work today, informed by art history, by theory, and of course by the practices of other artists. And so in Under the Influence, we ask some of the most influential artists of our time about their own influences, whether it's teachers they've had or collaborators that they've worked with, or their favorite artists. And so just last month, at the end of August, we released an Under the Influence video featuring Robert Longo, and so hopefully many of you have had a chance to see that. And tonight, the idea was that we would sort of expand that conversation, that we would take advantage of the opportunity of having Robert here in New York, and also sort of nod towards the current exhibition that's on view at Pace Gallery. There's this wonderful opportunity to see so much of your work in the city right now, that we would come together and talk a little bit more in depth about Robert's practice. For those of you who aren't familiar with the video series, we are going to go ahead and play a quick trailer just to whet your appetite.
The music of Mozart influenced me quite a lot. And actually, just a few weeks ago in Tokyo, I finished my production of Mozart opera Don Giovanni as a stage set designer. Well, since my childhood, just the very magical the sound of the music of Mozart just captured my mind. And then I'm just listening to like a voice from the heaven.
I would say Baldwin is the writer whose work, whose essays in particular, more than the novels, have been an influence on me, particularly Stranger in the Village, which is an essay he wrote in the 1950s, where he was living in a little Swiss village and says for many of the villagers he is the first Black person they'd ever seen. Goes on in that essay to kind of give a panoramic overview of imperialism, colonialism, race relations. It's an amazing essay, 12 or 13 pages, but it's had a profound influence on my career.
Two artists that really were kind of very influential were Robert Smithson and Richard Serra. I can actually remember a moment when I came across their works. I was coming out of a nightclub and I had to cut across a rotary, and I hit this Corten steel wall, and it was rotary arc, and it was dark, and I had to walk around the outside perimeter. I just thought it was the most stunning experience. Richard was so knowledgeable about art, about architecture, And then whenever I would get the courage, I had something new that I was experimenting with, I would call Richard up, and he would always come over to the studio. And I think, like, I was literally beginning to explore the first of the wave fields, and he just looked at it and he said, I don't know what this is, but keep doing it.
My influence, I think, has been possibly inspirational to people, to let them know that you can keep doing your work no matter how much people say they don't like it, or no matter how many people say it isn't art. I think you have to continue with your own vision and wait for culture to catch up or not. You know, it really doesn't matter. What matters is your time and your life, and being able to put your time into something that you believe in.
The other art form that I spend more time with than anything is media. I'm a big film and television watcher. I mean, I'm somebody who literally watches series. I'm still watching fucking Grey's Anatomy. I mean, it's ridiculous. But I've watched Days of Our Lives as soap opera since I was 7.
Melissa, are you afraid of being a star?
So you have to ask yourself, why are you attached to this? What is this? What is the ritual in one's life? There is something about being habitual and patterning that creates a way for you to move through your life in these other ways. And now that Days of Our Lives have gay characters on it, I waited my whole life for that. I mean, it's like, they tried the lesbian thing, that didn't work too well, but now there's definitely gay male characters.
I think the best advice I could give a younger artist is to realize that being an artist is a long distance run. It's not like a sprint. We're not like athletes. If you don't make it by the time you're 35, it's all over. I think David Sally said something that was so poignant. He said that art is the one thing that you could get better at as you get older. And I thought that was really brilliant.
So we've released 11 of those videos to date, and we're so honored to be joined by Robert Longo this evening. Again, this is the first time we're having a live version of these conversations, and to sort of just to celebrate again your contributions to art history, and also this video series that's trying to shine a light on artists like yourself who have been so influential. You were such a great, fantastic subject for Under the Influence, in part because you have always been quite explicit about the degree to which you are influenced by art history. And you've even made so many works that play explicit homage to people like Dürer and Rembrandt and Goya and the abstract expressionists and Picasso, and I'm sure I'm gonna miss a couple. In our video, we asked you to speak about influential artists and artworks, and you specifically cited Géricault's painting, The Raft of the Medusa. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity to maybe say a little bit more about that painting, because out of all of the artworks, right, that you have been moved by and even responded to in your practice, I thought it was really interesting that you picked that one.
Well, what's interesting is I went to school briefly. I didn't quite have the balls to be an artist early on. I always thought an artist are guys with berets and striped shirts and they go around like this. It's so incredibly uncool. But then I realized I couldn't do anything else in my life, but I could draw. So I got really interested in art history, and had this really great teacher who said, have you ever considered being an art historian? Maybe I said, no. How about an art restorer? So I ended up going to Italy to study restorations of paintings, which was a bit of a disaster. But I was in Florence at the time when they were restoring, after the big flood in 1975, and there was this incredibly wonderful, crazy Italian professor running around and yelling at all the men how they were fucking up the work. They're going, you're destroying it. And she left. And she was the woman who later went on to restore The Last Supper, where she took all the restoration off. It was really kind of cool. So the thing about, in Europe, what I realized when I saw like Velázquez and Rembrandt and Caravaggio, and I went, there's no fucking way I can paint like these people. And this is like, how am I gonna ever do this? And then also in the museums, you'd always see students making copies, classical art and stuff like that. And when I got back to America, I realized most American artists have no chops whatsoever. I mean, the thing is, our classical art is abstract expressionism. So it was really, for me, history has been really important to teach me about how to make a picture. Not necessarily the medium of paint and stuff like that, but how to make a picture is really important. And I lived in Paris during the 80s when I was one of the artists that kind of got blamed for the 80s. And I decided, if I stay here in New York, I'm gonna fucking kill my dealers or kill myself. And so I got the fuck out and I moved to Paris, which is the best thing that saved my life. I was able to work in Europe, and I would go to museums in Paris all the time. And when I saw the Raft of Medusa, it kind of blew me away because it's like on the scale of a movie, you know? And this idea that, you know, I take a snapshot and make it saturated with time by making it. But he made this painting in a way where he talked to the guys that were actually on the raft, and I read everything I could about this painting, and he basically constructed this painting, and it's like a miracle. The composition of it is spectacular. It's one of the few great paintings in history where most of the people in the painting are you see from the back. You know, there's only one guy you kind of see from the front, and the guy that you see from the front is the guy who wrote the book about it. So I'm sure you all know the story about the Raft of Medusa, but after Napoleon fell, the king installed all his stupid friends, kind of like what's happening right now, and this French owned a colony in Senegal, and they sent this armada of 4 or 5 ships filled with royalists and, you know, wealthy traders and things like that on these boats to go down to the colony. But the captain of this armada was this moron that got appointed, and he got the main boat, which was Medusa, stuck on a sandbar about a mile from the shore. And what he did was all the aristocrats and the rich people got on the lifeboats, and everybody else on the boat who were workmen, crew, the cook, whatever, they had to build a raft. They got pulled along. So they have these lifeboats with all the food in it and the oars, and they're pulling the raft on a rope, and the raft has 1 barrel of wine and some crackers or some crackers and cheese, whatever. Anyway, at one point, the captain says, they're slowing us down, and cuts the rope. And they drift for like 59 days, basically a mile from the coast, but they keep on going further and further out. And it becomes insane, and they start killing and eating each other. It becomes this whole fucking nightmare. And I think 3 or 4 of them got back to France and started telling people about this, about how, you know, the king's appointee basically took us, the working class, and threw us into the water. And he was so influenced by this story, he literally built a raft, and there's these stories about him going and getting dead body parts. So the idea, I mean, the other thing is I was impressed with what he chose not to show. He didn't show people eating each other or killing each other. He showed this moment where it was like, almost like a moment of hope, like they're about to get rescued, you know. But it's just a spectacular painting. And so I go see it and someone told me, this conservative I know, told me that the painting will eventually go black, because he used some fucked up, like, underpainting. So the painting, I realize every time I see it, it's getting darker and darker. So it has a life expectancy or something. It was also put away for many, many years because the king wouldn't let anybody see it. So I'm sorry, it's a long story, but I think it's a great piece of political art. I mean, I think all art is political, period. The guy who's painting sunsets and stuff like that, somebody comes say, you can't paint. I mean, I remember I grew up in the age of Reagan, so Reagan was like was Make America Great guy first. And I remember when Reagan became president, I thought, somebody could knock on my door and say, I can't do this. I mean, not in defense of Trump right now, but when politics are so fucked up, it's a great time to make art. Because now we're all kind of pissed off a little bit, and we're motivated. So during Reagan, if you think of what happened, some really great art happened in the 80s because of Reagan. Because before Reagan, there was Jimmy Carter, who was kind of had, his hair was over his ears, and he would pose in the field with blue jeans on. It was kind of like nobody was quite sure, was he kind of liberal? But when Reagan came in, it was like, this guy's, like somebody drew a line in the sand and say, take a position. Where do you stand? And that, so I think what's happening now, we have to take a position. Anyway, so anyway, the painting is really important on so many different levels. It's also just a piece of incredible picture making, period. Because the way the raft is positioning, the wind, the wave, it's a miracle for sure. My religion is art. So.
Okay, there was a lot in there. I'm trying to figure out where to go next with that. No, I mean, I think it's a helpful reminder that when Jericho was making this painting, he's doing something that obviously you now carry through with your art as well, which is that he's making a painting that is a history painting, that is a painting that has the scale and the ambitions of a history painting, which normally are reserved for telling the greatest stories of the time, but using that vocabulary to talk about contemporary political events, right? And so this is one of those origin points of the birth of modernism, of the notion of art as contemporary, as something that is reflective upon its own time and not simply sort of capturing some abstract ideals, notion of Arcadia, allegories, et cetera, or stories from the Bible or what have you, right? So this idea that art can have this kind of urgency and that being a great picture is actually part of that, right? Its efficacy, right, is tied to the fact that it's so compelling as a visual object, as an aesthetic experience. I mean, that's, yeah. Now, yes, the fact that you selected that painting, of course, it makes sense.
What's interesting, where that painting is situated in art history, what you have, we're in the cave, so the tribe is kind of telling you what to paint. Then the churches are built, the churches are telling artists what to make, the government is telling artists to make. All of a sudden, around 1860, somebody said, what really is the subject matter? What can we do? And all of a sudden, Courbet, Manet, all these guys started painting ordinary people. And all of a sudden, artists were free of subject matter. And this is, I think, is an incredibly important thing. Because I realize through my own work, I'm trying to make the viewer subject matter in the sense that they become the subject matter. But I think what's so really important about that moment in history is that artists were free of what to make pictures of. Any artists that are here, the greatest question we have is what the fuck do we make pictures of? What do we make art of? It's like, before it was like you had to do Jesus on the cross, or you had to paint this battle scene or whatever. But all of a sudden the idea of subject matter became really critical in that sense. So, and he was like part of that moment of painting this realistic stuff. But then the camera was invented and fucked everything up. And then all of a sudden paint got thicker and paint became the picture. And then abstract expressionism, and then blah, 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 blah.
I'm glad you got me back there, because I had wanted, when you first started giving that answer, I was like, oh, abstract expressionism, right? I mean, you mentioned them, and I wanted to circle back to them. You and I have something in common in our biography, which is that we both spent formative years living in Buffalo, New York, which is host to the Albright Knox Art Gallery, now the Buffalo AKG Art Museum, which is one of the best collections of post-war American abstract painting in the world, if not like the best. So to make this a kind of question, I guess I want to ask you, I mean, very generally, I could say like the importance of museums on you. We've already heard about that, you discovering the Raft of the Medusa, but maybe I'll try to make it really poppy. What's your favorite museum?
Like I said, like art's my religion. So it's like, I drive my wife crazy. We go to a city, and the first thing I go, okay, what's in the museums? I have to make sure I see this, that, And so I have lots of, it's I mean, obviously it's highly Western oriented. So I mean, in Europe, I love the Prado is like, how can you go wrong? The Louvre is spectacular. But Italy every museum is great. In the United States, it's like, this is where it gets a little far and few. The Met is really spectacular. I mean, as a student going there and going to see, I remember Madame X and looking at the skin and realizing this is a thing how I will never be able to paint like this. The layering, the transparency, how I'm seeing through her skin. I can see like the pink and the blue blood vessels and stuff, or Winslow Homer, and then to get to Jackson Pollock and like, wait, I can do that. It was like weird, kind of following the way museums are set up. Is that sometimes they're set up for artists to understand their ancestry. Because like art history is really important for artists because you don't want to reinvent the wheel. At the same time, all of art history is there to help you to make the next step, in a sense. If you want to be an artist, you might as well stand on the shoulders of giants, if you want to get, but yeah, art, the museums are, MoMA is really great. I remember seeing the Guernica and I going, what the fuck is this? It was like, is this really art? Or, and then learning about it, it's kind of like the Raft of Medusa, that whole story that's behind that painting. And yeah, I remember, and then seeing minimalism for the first time, it's like, what's that? You could just make boxes and call it art. It was like, to actually discovering what art was quite amazing. And then Duchamp shows up. Whoa, now I'm really confused, So, but anyway, I mean, I love being an artist in the sense, and also it's also very difficult. There's a lot of time when I do these talks, I say a lot of. My ex-wife was this extraordinary actress, and I remember saying to her, "How do you say these lines in a play over and over again?" She says, "Well, you have to believe them." And I realized, I speak from a kind of conviction about what I do. I mean, I know I repeat myself a lot, but I mean, I really believe the shit I'm saying. Really.
I think that comes across. You spoke a little bit about the enduring question for artists, which is, I think you phrased it, what the fuck do I make art about, maybe, was the... So I wanted to ask you about this question of how you decide what to make work about. So, as is on view right now, you can see that this destroyer cycle that you started in 2014 is you clearly like responding to certain images, whether they're from art history or they're photojournalistic and you see them in the news. I think mostly photojournalism. And then you seeing these images and then you're selecting and then sort of synthesizing and editing them into these new compositions. And if you look at some of the subjects of that cycle, I mean, we have everything from Confederate monuments that have been defaced to, the original one that first started it off was, of course, the extraordinary images that came out of Ferguson in 2014. And then, but there's also so much more. There's, sub-Saharan migrants on flotillas in the Mediterranean, and icebergs. So there's clearly a sort of through line, but in the vast sea of images in which we are all now optimistically swimming, more likely drowning, how do you choose?
I don't know. I think my work has always had a somewhat moral imperative involved in it somehow. I don't know how it happened. I mean, I think it goes back to like the whole coming of age in 1968 and the whole protest movement. So it seemed part of it for sure, and art seemed to be a way of dealing with it. And I think to simplify what I do right now is I think I'm trying to make cognitive anchors, images that need to be remembered. And that's a really important thing to me. And I choose images by the fact that they move me, and if they don't, or how much can I compose them and re-edit them, move them around compositionally to make them become something more beyond themselves. It becomes a real challenge in that sense. But I think also that I want to make art that is an extreme experience. That's really important to me. And I think that the choice of the images are really about wanting to possess the images. Because the thing is, a lot of the images are based on a split second. And it takes me months, sometimes a year, to make a drawing. And I like the idea that, I love that when I see art, I realize art is saturated with time. So when you're looking at a piece of painting or something like that, like when I'm working on something, I'm not necessarily thinking about what I'm working on at the moment. I'm thinking about that kid I knew in 5th grade that I punched in the face or whatever. Some random thought, but all that stuff is actually in the work. So not only are you seeing that image, but you're seeing all that energy that went into making that work is in there for sure. So yeah, I mean, the choice of the images are just the images I think that need to be chronicled or somehow need to be remembered. And I choose them in a way, and I tried to make them so, I think ancient archetypes are really important. I think myths happen every time you tell them. So a really great example of in the show, one of my favorite drawings are the 3 Graces. There are the drawings, these 3, was a windows in a wedding store where they had dresses of the mother or the bridesmaid and the bride, and they were in the windows of the store in Donbass in Ukraine. And when the Russians came in, they just blasted it with the machine guns, but it was double pane glass, so the glass is totally all shattered, but the women are still there, and there was something incredibly powerful about this image. And it was basically, I saw the 3 Graces that goes back, and every artist has used it as a motif for years, and I thought that was a really profound thing. So I'm using my art history all the time with the work compositionally. I'm stealing from everybody, because composition is a way that we, like, as artists, kind of like give a roadmap to people to read a picture. Because art is incredibly democratic in the sense that you don't have to start at the beginning. You could start at the bottom of the picture, look at it that way. You could look at it every way you want. And the other thing is I always think about how many times have I seen my favorite movie? Maybe 10 times. How many times have I seen my favorite painting? 50 times. So, I mean, there's something really quite poignant about all that stuff, but did I answer your question?
I think you did. You also threw me another question to ask you, and it's low-hanging fruit, so I'm going to seize it. What is your favorite movie that you've seen 10 times, since you mentioned it?
I think that my favorite movie is in this, like, I kind of go to Robert Smithson here. It's like a tar pit in my brain. It's like, I think I remember bits and pieces of movies that I like better than, like, I love John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever walking down the street, or I love the helicopters in the beginning of Apocalypse Now. I just remember moments of the movies, but I mean, I'm pretty easy. My threshold of movies is I watch anything pretty much. So I mean, but I mean, I like watching like movies while I make all my work for sure. I mean, but yeah, I mean, obviously my favorite movies are like things like The Godfather or The Conformist or, or one of my favorite films is La Jetée by Chris Marker, which is a film of all stills except for one moment. And so, I mean, I was fortunate living in Buffalo, being in media studies. I got to see Eisenstein and Leni Riefenstahl. I mean, my exposure to cinema was really quite extensive in that sense. And what's bizarre now is that I don't go to movies that much. Fortunately, my youngest son is going to be a film director, so whenever we get together, we go to movie. He drags me to movie theaters, and you have to see a movie in a theater. Okay, I just watch it at home on TV, and he reminds me like movie theaters are really, really important, especially if you go see a movie with a lot of people, because you have this consensus hallucination happening, which is quite miraculous. I remember seeing Jaws for the first time, and everyone in the theater freaking out at the same time. So yeah, my kid made me really aware of that for sure. So yeah, so my favorite movies I like a lot. Couldn't say.
I mean, you just mentioned the Department of Media Study and being in Buffalo, and I know that when you were there, you crossed paths with both Paul Sharits and Hollis Frampton. And given that you now yourself are deploying some of these structuralist film techniques in your current, your most recent films, where you have this rapid flickering of black and white patterns that creates this kind of hypnagogic flicker experience, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about their influence on you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many. I'm always kind of shocked about how many people don't know about experimental films. But experimental films is kind of like the abstract expressionism of cinema, because what you're dealing with is film as a material that is not condemned to tell a story. So you had guys making film where they just take this film and take a piece of sandpaper, run it all over the paper and stick it to the. So I worked for Sharits made flicker films with color. So I used to make his film on an animation stand, I was telling you, and it would get to the point where my thumb would get really raw, and I was living with Cindy Sherman at the time, and Cindy would come in, we'd sit there like, okay, 3 frames of red. We had to find the red in a pack of Color Aid paper. But the films were miraculous. So I learned a lot from those guys to the point that when I started doing rock videos, I started stealing all those things. So I started making rock videos that had like 800 edits in them. Like I did one for New Order that was like, we broke the Avid equipment because it had so many edits in it. So I learned a lot from those guys for sure. The fact of the nature of film for sure was really important.
I mean, mentioning your transition to making rock videos, I mean, you've done music videos for New Order, and you worked with Gretchen Bender, and then obviously Johnny Mnemonic, hugely influential in my own personal biography and canon as a avowed cyber goth. It's in my Instagram handle, so it must be real. I wanted to ask actually about that transition, that desire, to move out of art making as your primary activity and to try to be a film director and make music videos. And I mean, maybe that's the wrong way to characterize it. But anyway, there was this moment in your career where you sort of expanded your activities, right? Which leads me to wonder about, art's influence. And maybe even I feel like art is my religion, but maybe the kind of limits of art's influence, or maybe the way to phrase this question is, what was it that drew you to start engaging in these mass media formats?
So I'm dyslexic, so I basically faked my way through school, and I watched TV endlessly. What was ironic, when I met Cindy, we both kind of grew up on Long Island, and there was a thing called $1 Million Movies on TV. It would run 3 times a day. It was always old black and white movies, and it would be the same movie all week. So you could see King Kong like 35 times. Like if you were staying home sick from school. And we both grew up with these black and white movies. It was really quite pivotal. But I remember early on when I started making work, and I finally got some action going that was getting accepted. I thought, could I shift my medium and do something else and maintain whatever? I wanted to figure out what it was I was actually doing. So I was trying to figure out, if I shifted the medium, would I uncover what it was I was doing? Because I really had no fucking idea what I was doing. So I thought that would be a test for me. Could I shift the medium and still maintain what it was I was doing? So that was really quite critical for me in that sense, to do that. But the thing that led me to wanting to make a movie is because growing up with the whole kind of like appropriation idea that I was using movie stills, wouldn't it be cool if I made my own movie so I could use my own movie stills? I mean, that was like the idea in the beginning, but I got a little bit out of control, and I made a Hollywood movie, which was a bit of a nightmare. It was just like, so if Johnny Mnemonic was a torturous experience. It's why I will never make movies again. But I did have some revenge, some closure. So on the 25th anniversary of Johnny Mnemonic, I went back and I worked with this really great editor, and we turned the whole film black and white, and it looks great. And it really looks like the movie I wanted to make. And I remember sending it to Keanu and to Gibson. I'm really worried about this, and they said, "Oh, this is great. Do it, do it." So and that's a whole other different story. But and TriStar, Sony was going to release it, and they wanted to do a Blu-ray disc where they would do interviews, commentaries. I said, "I don't have anything good to say about you guys," and they said, "No, say whatever you want. Say what really. It was a fucked up thing. No, say whatever you want." So this guy was very enthusiastic. So my wife, who's a filmmaker, Keanu was in Paris at the time, and Gibson was in Vancouver. So she got 3 different crews and shot us on a Zoom, and it was great. We talked, and I think Keanu didn't realize how much trouble I was having at my end, because I was basically hired. It was my project, I got it going, but the producer, the evil producer, had a plan that after a week I would get fired, and the second assistant director would take over, which never happened, but it was such an incredibly, and by turning it black and white, I made the film I wanted to make. But the irony is that we made this commentary that is really great and insightful, and we all have lots of great stuff to say, so we sent it to Sony. And the guy that wanted us to do it wasn't there anymore. He was replaced by this robot woman who said, "Send it to us." And as soon as she heard me call somebody an asshole, she sent it to legal. So what happened is, after an hour commentary, it became 20 minutes. They chopped it up so much, and it went, this reinforced why I'm not making movies. I mean, that's why I make the movies I make now. I don't have to deal with Hollywood.
Don't worry, you can find the unedited version of this conversation on Artforum's website in the near future. Full, uncut, 1-hour version.
It was just dealing with that. I'm in awe of filmmakers that make great films. I'm totally in awe of how they can. It's such a demanding art form, and it's so complex to deal with, and actually make a great movies, because there's so many obstacles. It's like, imagine if somebody gives you, okay, I'm going to give you money to go buy red paint. You go to the store, you buy a can of red paint, you come home, the person leans over your shoulder and says, "It's the wrong color." "But that's the red I want to use." "But no, it's the wrong color." Imagine multiplying that by like $30 million. That's what those guys experience. "It's the wrong color. It's too dark. Reshoot it. He's not sympathetic. All these morons. They couldn't. When I made Johnny Mnemonic, the head of TriStar, Mark Ken, couldn't say mnemonic, so he wanted to change the title of the movie. It's better. He wanted to come up with. He said, "Let's turn it to Johnny Get a Gun." I said, "There is a movie that, Dalton Trumbo. Remember that guy? It was like dealing with a level of stupidity that was unbelievable. It was just like, we need. It was just, anyway. It was an experience that threw me back into my work, which was really great. I went, this is not for me. I went back. I mean, I admire people like Schnabel that actually figures out how to make movies now. But I mean, I fantasize about making movies, but my kids don't make movies. He's far better at that. He's more trained in it than I am. But it was, anyway. So these movies that I make now are almost in a weird way homages to like my knowledge about structuralist films, but and they're all, they're fun to do. I pay for them myself. I don't have to write a script. I don't have to hire actors, and they kind of carry the kind of energy that I want, for sure.
I want to ask a question about, it's like, how much time do we have left? About the world and what's going on right now. The series, that you're doing now, right, obviously responding to contemporary politics, to what's going on, but it's not the first time that your work has opened up to these questions, right? So I'm thinking of the Magellan series from '96, which is where you had a daily practice of drawing an image every single day, many of which were drawn from the news. And I guess the question I kind of want to ask is, how do you see things changing? I mean, it's such a big question, but compared to what you were doing in the 90s versus what you're doing now, and I guess we could think about it in a very concrete sense, like how is your process different? Are you encountering your source material in a different way? I know you've used social media, but also have you seen the images change? I don't know. I don't mean to be. I don't know if there is an answer to this question, but I'm sort of curious.
So, I mean, one thing I think politics has become basically politics of hate. You know, and like if you look at the history of humankind, it's like corruption, envy, domination, and greed. You know, so we're seeing it all now, very visible in a weird way. And yeah, it's kind of disturbing, but I kind of lost my thought.
Well, I guess my question would be about the visual ecology, right? So have you guys seen that, there's a famous infographic, and I'm so sorry I'm forgetting who made it, but that charted the development of the front page of the New York Times, and you can see how in the very beginning of its history, it's basically entirely text, and then gradually photos are introduced to A1, and then there's more than one photo, and then the photos get bigger and bigger until you get to the point where basically it's the entire top half of the front page of the New York Times is just an image. And I think about that infographic a lot because it speaks to how rapidly our understanding of current events transformed from something that was conveyed and communicated and discursively produced through text to something that all happens through images now. And thinking about all of the political campaigns that can be either launched or ended because of one image, you know, thinking of the mission accomplished or stuff like that. And so I guess, you know, now that we are in this moment where we are so saturated with images, you know, how do we navigate that as people who are in the business and also the calling, right, of art?
Artists, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to show you. We should be Oliver Wendell Holmes called. He used this phrase, mirror with a memory. And that's what I think we do as artists. I mean, the thing also was interesting to me is that my medium has these limitations. I've worked on the same paper now for like 30 or 40 years. It's a paper that has just enough grain in it to evoke a photograph. So maybe you think it's a photograph. It's not like the paper like Seurat would use, very, very textured. And it's mounted onto honeycomb aluminum. And the drawings, when they're framed, they weigh like 600 pounds. But the thing is, I'm limited by the size of the paper, and I'm limited by the size of the plexiglass. So what ends up happening is all the work is somewhat the same size. So I realized that my show is a bit like going through Instagram. It's almost like you can kind of swipe it. You know, you can go, and I kind of like that, because I kind of like Instagram. I mean, I find myself, like, instead of sitting at the TV changing channels, I could just, you know, look up what's happening in sports, what's going on in the world. Instagram is, I feel like the show in a weird way is a bit like an edited version of Instagram for sure. The idea of going back to the idea of cognitive anchors, these images I'm choosing, I want them to be remembered. The problem is that, you know, I think so many images are happening that we're not remembering them. They're just here and they're gone. I mean, I did this drawing of a Jewish cemetery where I become this guy who saves newspapers. So one day I was looking at a newspaper, it was a couple weeks old, and like on page 10, there was this picture of a cemetery in Strasbourg in France where some idiot went through this Jewish cemetery spraying SWAT stickers on it. And I'm saying, I didn't hear about this. It's on page 10. And I said, this image needs to be seen. And, you know, so I ended up making a drawing of it and learning as much as I could about it. We translated the names on the tombstones who knew where they were. But it was also weird because making the drawing, like doing the drawings of Pollock, so you actually felt how the guy was the same size. Everyone is the same size. He's going, shh, shh. You could actually physically feel him. Every swastika was exactly the same size. So it was one guy who was probably 5, 6, whatever, and who just made these swans. Anyway, so that was an image, a perfect example that I thought that needed to be remembered, needed to be like. I also, at the same time, I want to. I think my work is a form of atonement, because I'm so pissed off at what's happening in the world, because my life is great and I see that people are suffering. It's just fucked up, and at the same time I want to implicate the viewer. I want to you're part of this. You saw that picture. What do you really think about it? How do you feel about it? I think Sherry and I talked a lot about the fact that people get confused about our work. I'm not telling you whether this is good or bad. I'm saying what the fuck do you think about this? What do you think in that sense? And I think that's a really important part for as an artist that we pose those questions for sure.
One of the questions in Under the Influence is asking about advice that artists would give to other artists who are, developing their practice, their careers. And while you answered that question already for us, I wonder if we could broaden it to what advice you would just give, let's say, like young people who are, trying to act morally, ethically in this world and are being constantly confronted by images of genocide, by images of, just oppression, everything that's going on. You call your current show at Pace, it's the weight of hope, which is hope we usually think of as something that's, buoyant, something that's elevating, not normally as something that has a kind of gravity to it, except in a sort of metaphorical sense.
But I read same place. St. Augustine said that hope has 2 daughters. One of them is rage, so you're angry about the way things are, and courage is the ability to change things. So I think I have a lot of hope.
Well, on that note, I feel like I should end it on a hopeful note, because if I keep talking about contemporary politics in 2025, I don't know how long I can sustain that. So thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Thank you, Robert Longo. Thank you to Powerhouse and also our sponsor, Rotary, for making our reception happen.